Hello and welcome to the PRS event with Dr. C.F. Martin. My name is Greg Salyer. I'm the president of the Philosophical Research Society, and I'm so happy you've joined us for a very timely discussion of this book, Get Real, by our friend, Dr. C.F. Martin. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Catherine, for writing this book. Would you mind beginning by telling us just what you do, where you are, and what's going on?
Oh, yeah. And I would just like to say, I would like to start off with just saying I'm so humbled to be here tonight, speaking with you, speaking for this university. It holds such a sacred place in my heart. And just to have this platform, even if we were just having tea, it would be just a big deal for me. Nevertheless, having the opportunity to talk about this book that's really near and dear to my heart. And I'm excited to tell everybody about it. Outside of, writing books in 2020, it seemed like the thing to do. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I specialize in PTSD and anxiety disorders. I also really help people with depression and grief-related issues, but probably if I had to say one area that I really focus in on is anxiety disorders and really recovering from PTSD and trying to live our most peaceful life.
Well, I'm sorry your work isn't relevant in 2021. That's too bad. Yeah. Wow. You must feel, I hope you're okay doing this work, because I'm sure your readers and also your patients are in great need of your services. So are you doing okay?
Yeah, I think if there is any other healthcare provider out there listening,
Right.
we certainly have had a full load, nonstop, going into work mostly like this every day to help our patients just try to get through this, really difficult year. And 2021 seems to just be plowing away. So.
Yeah.
It certainly is a trying time, and I'm glad I'm in an industry that can still try to help people throughout this tough time.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, this book is going to help people, and I thank you for finding a way to get this out, especially when you did. I know you didn't time it that way, and you're going to tell us more about that in a little while, but some of the best things have their own timing.
Yes.
The university has. Okay. So you're a practicing psychologist. You've been that for a while. Can you share how you transitioned into becoming a writer?
Yeah, I would love to. So I guess it was just one of those things that was meant to be. My grandfather wrote several books. My father wrote a book, and then I started feeling kind of compelled to write this book. And I say compelled primarily because it was certainly something that I never had like my heart planned on doing. I wasn't, an English major planning on writing the next great American novel or anything like that. But I say compelled primarily because, like you said, I've been in therapy for a while, giving therapy. And I felt compelled to write this book because I found myself kind of telling my patients kind of the same things, making it unique, of course, to everybody's circumstances, but kind of the same kind of advice and thoughts over and over again.
Right.
And I felt compelled to write a book to get it onto a platform where everybody can just kind of get this. Like, you don't need to come see me.
Right.
I'm really not this like fountain of knowledge, but I can put it in this book for, everybody to go get on a Kindle so that they could find some help and relief from the comfort of their own homes. And so I felt compelled because I felt like it was the right thing to do, to kind of get this knowledge and advice out of my head and onto a tangible or, Kindle version, so people can just take it home and think about it for themselves. And so this kind of just came to me like it was one of those things that I had to do.
Yep. Well, I think that shows. Honestly, as president of the Philosophical Research Society, I find myself giving things out more than putting things in, so I don't read much. it's just not in the cards for me right now. I mean, I read some. And so what happens is I become very selective about what I read, right? And so I got your book, you sent it to me, and I read it and I loved it. And that's so rare for me these days because I'm processing all kinds of information as president, but we're all processing all kinds of information. And it's hard to find something that you can sit with, right? And I found this is a book you can sit with, and that is a treasure. And further, we come from very different academic backgrounds, but I was immediately struck by your opening chapter, how language shapes our worldview, because it resonated with my own studies in the philosophy of language. And you write this, let me read this. You say, I believe that the words we use in our communications with others and ourselves, I really like that part, by the way, and ourselves, because that interior voice is sometimes the most damaging, can lead us to think that our lives are miserable or hopeless, or wonderful and full of promise, or anything in between. And while this insight, end quote, while this insight is not uncommon in the philosophy of language that I study, literary theory that I studied in my doctorate, I don't think I've ever heard it come from a psychologist. So can you talk a little bit about what brought you to this insight about language?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think language is one of those things that in general, we don't think about it enough. You know,
Right.
we learn language when we're babies and, you know, we now know how to use it and we just move on.
Yep.
I think like something UPR and I really agree on is just the general idea of mindfulness.
Yeah.
And not just being a passive user of language, but really being an active user in language and in therapy. So as I said earlier, I really see a lot of patients with PTSD and anxiety related disorders. And so I have people in my office that, you know, they don't mean to, but they start using words like, this is going to be the worst, or I'm the worst, or that was the worst, or she's the worst, or my job's the worst.
Absoluting, you call that, I think, right?
Yes, they're absoluting everywhere. And they're, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. But what I see a lot regarding my my PTSD patients is it's this very stuck story. It's a very stuck story with the words that we're using. And one of the, there are many forms of therapy for PTSD and anxiety. One of the ones that I really connected to naturally was with narrative therapy.
Yep.
In narrative therapy, there are several kind of components to it, kind of incorporating the story, the trauma, the bad things into our life. And then also, if possible, through the use of words, let's modify it a little bit. Let's go ahead and modify some things with the words. So maybe transforming, I have the worst job ever, to I have a really challenging job, or
Right.
That was the worst day of my life, to that was a really hard day in my life. But the word, just like trying to find these little kind of pieces that can give a little bit, so that the kind of tape being played over in our head over and over and over again can just kind of get, you know, stopped for just a moment, so that we can have a little sense of peace. And you know what, let's start a new tape that, okay, that was a really hard day in my life. That was a really challenging day in my life. That was a bad day in my life. But let's just try to get away from maybe these really catastrophizing bad things to make room for a little bit of healing and peace, so we can move on. And so narrative therapy was probably kind of the catalyst to this recognition that how important our words are. And then it kind of goes from like big ticket items like trauma and PTSD to even everyday things, you know, just living in this world today. How often do you hear people in our everyday lives being like, oh my gosh, this is the worst day ever. I couldn't find parking.
Yeah.
It's like parking.
Yeah.
that's annoying. But if that's the worst thing that happened to you in your life, it's pretty good.
Well, and when even if it's a rhetorical device, it's hyperbole, right? It also gives you nowhere else to go. When you go right to 11, as they say in Spinal Tap, or if you max out your language, there's nowhere else for you to go.
Yeah, and I actually in my book I created my own phrase about you have to be careful about kind of the old story about calling wolf, you
Yeah,
know?
right.
And
Right.
so if you know you're my best friend and I'm calling you every day being like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I have to talk. This is the worst day. I just had the worst day ever. You're gonna eventually start ignoring my calls
That's right. That's right.
because
Yeah.
you're like, oh my gosh, it's Catherine. She's telling me she had the worst day of her life. I'm, you know, whatever. But
Yeah.
if I'm a typically, you know, pretty balanced person and I text you, hey, I just had the worst day of my life, it's still gonna have impact. It's still gonna have like, whoa, like Catherine said this, like she never uses exaggeration or like, that's really big. It must be a big deal. And so when we can use words, and in therapy also, like if you're saying like, oh my gosh, I had the worst day ever, please call, I'm eventually just gonna start believing that you're exaggerating and that, you know, this is just what they do. I'll call her back, you know, at my next break. Versus if it's a patient that's like, I just had the worst day ever, please give me a call, and they never do that, I'm gonna be like, oh my gosh, this is serious. I need to drop everything and call them. And
Excellent point.
I definitely really connect with this idea of finding appropriate, accurate language, not only for good communication, but for the things that go through our mind, the tape, and getting that tape to play something healthy.
Yes, wonderful. Well, speaking of narrative therapy, your insights about what you call labeling follow from your notion of language's ability to create and maintain a world. But rather than ask you to give a theoretical analysis of labeling, which you can do, of course, I think I would just like to ask you to tell the spider story. Would you mind doing that?
I would love to tell the spider story. It's probably one of my favorite stories to tell in general. So friends, if you're out there watching, you've probably heard this before. So to those of you who have not, several years ago, I was backpacking through India, in this very jungly part of India called Varkala, which is beautiful, by the way. It's a beautiful coastal line. And so we, you know, train, rickshaw through for a few hours, and we finally get to our hostel hotel, and I just want to shower. I am sweaty. I am exhausted. I just want to go get showered. And so my boyfriend, husband now, he was going to fill out like all the paperwork, and they showed me to my room, and I was like, oh, wonderful. It was like a nice clean room, and I was really happy. And so I put my stuff down, and it was one of those rooms, simple rooms, where it was just a basic square, and then it had like a shower curtain separating the main room from like the bathroom sink area.
Right.
And so I start getting ready for the shower, and I go in and I pull the sheet across to close the door. And like right here, right in front of me where I closed the curtain, was the biggest spider I've ever seen in my life. And okay, like I grew up on the East Coast in the United States, like, you know, the type of spiders that I'm used to seeing are like, you know, these little annoying guys. And right there in front of my face was the biggest spider I've just ever seen. And it was one of those few moments in my life where I actually like lost my breath. Like I was just so scared. Like, what is this thing? Like, is it like an octopus that like got out of water? Like this thing can't be a spider. It's just that big. And so after a few seconds of just sheer voiceless terror, I somehow just push the curtain away and I run into like the main room, and I just don't even know what to do. Like I'm in total fight or flight mode. My logical brain has just been kicked out. It's totally emotion running, fear. And so the most I'm able to do is like, I throw some clothes on And I just opened up the door because I wanted to keep like a somewhat eye on it in case the spider like ran out. And so I just opened the door and I was like, hi, but I couldn't really talk yet. I was like, hi, please come. There's a spider in the room. And he was like, seriously, honey, like I'm doing the business work too. Okay. Like you're just supposed to be showering. And I was like, you need to come here. There's a spider. And so he's like, okay, fine. He finishes up and he like comes in and he's like, all right, where is the spider that you need me to kill? And I'm like, it's on the curtain. It's on the curtain. Just there. And so he's like laughing and he pulls the curtain, like, just like I did. And he just screamed this like high pitched, like scream. And he like does the same thing I do, just faster. He like jumps back into the main room, hyperventilating. He's like, that's not a spider. That's like an animal. Like, you set me up. Like, you can't tell me that's a spider. Like, and so then like, and now it's like a big joke that like I set him up with the spider. That's like man-eating spider that was like sitting behind the curtain, just like waiting. Long and the short of it, some of the hotel people help and kill the spider, and then they try to calm us down by telling us that, oh, they're very common in this side of the world. I was like, that does not comfort me at all, but I'm glad it's out of my room. And so the reason I put that story into the book is because it really highlights how important words are in communication with ourselves and others. So I called it a spider. I think a zoologist would agree that it was a spider. It was technically a spider. But from my, I don't want to say avatar, but like my like image of what a spider is, it's probably like 1 or 2 inches, 8 legs, probably doesn't like get too far off the ground. You know, maybe we're talking a tarantula that's like, you know, like maybe this big, hairier, all still spiders. Especially like, you know, where I'm from in the world, like that's the kind of spiders that I'm aware of in the world. Same with my husband. So when I tell him there's a spider in the room, he's thinking the same thing that I'm thinking. But I set him up, obviously not on purpose, but that label of calling it a spider was inadequate to prepare him for what he was about to see. And so, and I put that story in because even if I had my wits about me and I started saying things like, honey, it's the biggest spider I've ever seen. This is like Teenage Mutant Spider behind that curtain. This is Godzilla's spider. Be prepared. That still wouldn't really have helped because he has never seen a spider like that before, nor have I. So maybe big spider to him would have been like this big, you know? And so it was an inadequate way. So I set him up. I didn't prepare him adequately. But if I had done the opposite of exaggerating and calling it these, you know, funny names like, you know, Godzilla spider, Teenage Mutant Ninja Spider, all of those things, he wouldn't have believed that either because he would have just thought I was exaggerating, and he would have still have prepared for like, you know, a big spider. What would have helped was if I had been able to maintain my composure and say, honey, I know you're not going to believe me, but there's about an 8-inch spider behind that curtain. Okay. So you might want to get like a broom or a gun. I don't know to prepare yourself, like one of those like fencing shields. I'm not sure, but it's like, just to prepare you, it's probably about like this big. It like covers like this area. And then maybe he would have been able to prepare himself because the labels in our mind and the words connected to them really matter. And so that was my funny story of sharing what my label of a spider was, what his label of a spider was, and the reality in our face of what needed a more accurate label.
So many analogs to psychological development there. And there's another analog that I thought of when I was hearing you tell the story as opposed to reading it, is This is exactly what happens when we encounter the sacred. I'm not saying your spider was sacred. It might have been, but
I hope not.
but we go along with these labels that you talk about, and they are inadequate, but we forget at times they're inadequate. And so when we have an epiphany, for example, or an experience of the sacred that doesn't fit, we have some choices. We can adjust our labels, or we can simply reinforce our labels and not learn anything from the experience, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and adapt.
Adapt, exactly. Yes, there are lots of different spiders in the world, and you found out.
Yes, I did. The city girl needs to get out more, apparently.
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Oh, anytime.
I find it fascinating that you actually employ your theory of language. Language is world and soul building is what I would say you're doing. In one case, you do that by changing the definition of a common phrase, weapons of mass destruction. So can you tell us about how you changed the definition of weapons of mass destruction to apply to getting real?
Yes, absolutely. I really struggled with that term because something that I pride myself on is my, lack of use of, hyperbole and exaggeration, like really big statements. And this is a big statement to compare something to a weapon of mass destruction. Like, you're going for it. Like, when you're going to say something that big. I thought of, I kind of bantered around with myself about it with a few other titles. I was thinking about, like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse type stuff, but I was like, that's really dramatic too. And so I was like, you know what, like, let's just go with this for a while and then just see if it feels right at the end. And so, but I ended up sticking with it because, exaggeration isn't necessarily exaggeration if it's really true. Like, some things really are terrible, you know, and that's not being, like a bad thing. That's not lying. Sometimes things are really amazing and awesome and wonderful. And sometimes things really are tragic and sad. And so just because it's kind of like a really like hitting hard label, I really do kind of believe in it. So a weapon of mass destruction, for those of you out there, it's defined as a chemical, biological, or radioactive weapon capable of widespread death and destruction. So it's a big thing. It's a big, bad thing. WMDs are threats, and they're seen as very dangerous to our lives and our survival. So as a therapist, I clearly don't work with biological weapons or warfare or chemicals of any of that sort. But I have dealt with the aftermath of psychological damage. I have seen and dealt with patients who have survived the most horrific childhoods, sometimes even no physical touching at all, just that emotional verbal abuse for years, that kind of chronic abuse. And after a lifetime of that type of self-critical talk that makes us feel miserable, what's worse? I think they're easily comparable. If I could rewrite the definition of a WMD, I would say it's a chemical, biological, radioactive, or language-based weapon capable of causing widespread death and destruction. Truly, and if you want to think of it on like a grand level, think of how much, propaganda has killed people, probably millions of people throughout history. Spreading lies and, getting people to hate people, it's probably cost millions of lives throughout history, throughout the world. And so to forget about language and its destructive power, I think is a mistake. And so I would certainly want to add it. And so that's why I kind of, obviously I don't have the authority to change the definition of weapons of mass destruction. That's why I coined my own term, psychological weapons of mass destruction. I think to give it the place that it deserves. So when people say things like, oh, I never touched her, I never touched him, I never hurt him, blah, blah, blah. It's like, you still cause massive damage from the mind and body. Because I could really, I would love to talk more about this, but if anybody's out there, there's something called the ACEs study. ACEs are higher, and an ACE stands for an adverse childhood experience.
Yes, yes.
And in short, what they're basically studying with that is that the amount of trauma typically equates with a host of physical problems, autoimmune system problems being one of them. The more often that we have, if we have a higher ACE score, typically the higher autoimmune problems, nevertheless, a host of other issues. And so again, just kind of like to hit it home, trauma, psychological damage can be equally as damaging as any of those other weapons of warfare that are out there. And that also gives us a reason to wield language appropriately, because we don't want to hurt anybody or ourselves with this very powerful force that is language. So don't mean to be dramatic, but I also wanted to try to be accurate and remind everybody about how powerful the force of language is.
Well, we're recording this after January 6th, and you wrote this well before January 6th. So you were not only prescient in doing that. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, other social media platforms that deal with language have now realized your insight, right? And so because, yeah, exactly. If they had listened to you, well, you know, it's much more complicated than that. But what happened on January 6th was the result of language. Language did that, right? Yeah. So it's an incredibly important insight you have. So thank you for that.
Oh, no, thank you. And thanks for spreading the word. We got to get the word, no pun intended there.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely. It's not this innocuous, you know, lifeless thing. It definitely has its own force.
Well, it's you quote from the Genesis story at the very beginning of your work, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. It is a creative force, and a destructive one, as you say. Yeah. Well, I think something else, I should say, that may distinguish your work is that you readily acknowledge and cite research. Now, to be sure, other psychologists do that, but not with the kind of accessibility your writing has. So some psychologists, however, seem to want the reader to think they've come up with these theories and insights on their own. And this personally drives me insane, because I see something like this and I'm like, oh, that's Lao Tzu, or that's Plato. And yet it has to be, I understand market forces and all that, but part of the work of PRS is showing the continuity of wisdom from the ancient world until now. And you do that. You quote Lao Tzu, for example, in one of your chapters. So you're not that kind of psychological writer. Can you talk about why you incorporated scholarly research in a book that's designed to be read by everyone, not just professional psychologists or academics?
Oh, yeah. Like, you know, I am far too shy to want to make anybody think that, you know, I don't want to take credit for anybody else's stuff. That's, you know, I think it's so important for credit to be given where credit is due. And, you know, I don't want anybody to think that, oh, wow, she must be a genius when I have stolen all of my ideas from somewhere else and just hope that nobody notices. But no, I also do it not only just because of, you know, that and my personality I just couldn't do that. But I also did it because, you know, what I'm doing, I don't think is any, you know, any amazing feat. You know, I did my research And I wanted to let people know that, this does not just need to be something from a white tower that us academics are hoarding and for us to know about. And you have to, pay us a lot of money to find out this helpful life stuff. And so it's like, hey, if you like this stuff, here's where, I found it out. It didn't come to me in an epiphany and I wrote it. This is where I found it. If you want to learn more about that, it's all just about trying to help people find, the answers to something that they've been looking for a while. And I really disagree with the idea of, like, I get it. People need to, be compensated for their hard work and labor. But I mean, after so much, isn't the idea just if we have a good, healthy society, isn't that going to benefit us all? And so like, even like with the book, imagine how much better the world would be if, so let's just say everybody read my book and, it helped and somehow reduce general anxiety.
Absolutely.
Fear tends to be a huge proponent of anger and poor decision making.
Yeah.
And so if we could all just get better managed for that, whether it's my book or somebody else's book, if we can start getting more information out about how to cope with life, because, life is difficult. And, that's not any sort of, deep insight either. It's long been believed, even, from the PRS angle about in life, there's going to be suffering. And so the best we can do is work together collaboratively to do our part and try to alleviate it, maybe just a little bit. And so we're not going to, I'm not going to solve anything, but maybe I can help somebody get this out. And if they like it, then, my references are like right in there in the book to learn more about it. I actually, I started talking in one of the chapters about substance abuse. And at the end of that, I put in a clip there about if you think you're suffering with substance abuse, like, let's get help. Here are some like lists and resources. And through like kind of like my editing team, I ended up taking it out because they're like, it kind of takes away, like, this isn't a substance abuse healing book. And I was like, okay. So that got cut at the last minute, but the whole idea of it was like, let's just get information out there. And so kind of in that spirit of like, hey, let's just get some, here's some research out there that, you don't need to be a scholar to understand it, maybe to write it. You need to, but just to read it and to understand it and to help your life, let's get it out there.
Yeah. Or if you want the scholarly support for your theories, it's there.
Yeah.
If you want to get into that, it's there. I love that. Not only do you do inline citations, you have a bibliography at the end. And it seems simple, but I think it's really important and really speaks to your authorship as a way to help seekers, as you're saying, because it means this is not the final word. In fact, there were words that came before this, and there's a path for you after this. I love it.
Great. Yeah, that was the point.
Yep. Well, again, the title of the book is Get Real, but that's also an acronym. So what does Get Real stand for?
All right. Yeah. So Get Real. Okay. So if anyone's been in therapy before, us therapists love our acronyms.
Yes, you do.
So what was really perfect about this was the acronym came second. It was originally just Get Real, kind of in the spirit of get real with your language and your words, and be accurate with it. And then it really wasn't until maybe a year ago that I think I went to some conference with a lot of acronyms. And I was like, yeah, it must have been over a year ago because pre-COVID. I went to a conference, they had a lot of acronyms. And I was like, I wonder if I could do that with Get Real. And so I just listed it out and it just fit so perfectly. So Get Real, the first three letters, if anybody's out there with a pencil and a piece of paper, Get Real stands for starting with a gentle voice, evaluate for truthfulness. Evaluate for truthfulness. I believe it's Proverbs 15 says, a gentle voice turns away wrath. And I really believe that as well, even with like communication tools. If we're going to approach something, let's find like an even voice, an even place to approach it, and it'll help. It really will. Ourselves as well. Children as well. You know, even in education studies, if we're screaming at children about how to do fractions, they're not going to learn. We just kind of like shut down. And so if we're having a hard time, screaming at ourselves about how stupid we are isn't going to help anything. And that's not just being nice. This is just being objective. You know, even if I was just your emotionless therapist, screaming at yourself is not going to help you. Okay, it really isn't. And so let's find that gentle voice before we start. And so the G was really important before we get into it. So finding that gentle voice, okay, we found it. Now let's evaluate for truthfulness.
Yeah.
Oftentimes that tends to be enough for a lot of people. Let's just evaluate for truthfulness. I like to be thorough though. And so I typically encourage patients, even if they feel a lot better after doing that, a little assessment, let's go ahead and do the REAL. And the REAL stands for rationally execute accurate language. So just to be clear, if you are at home writing this down, so get real stands for a gentle voice, evaluate for truthfulness, rationally execute accurate language. So let's go ahead and maybe do a little example about a get real. Let's just say, oh, I'm so stupid. You know, how many people today, maybe that thought has like popped through their head. Oh, I'm so stupid. You know, they drop their, they drop their keys, they, run into something, walk into something, and they say, oh, I'm so stupid. They get an answer wrong. They do something wrong at work. Oh, I'm so stupid. Whoa, buddy. Okay, let's find a gentle voice and let's evaluate that statement for any truthfulness. Let's vet this guy out. Don't just let this thought ruin your mood and your day. Okay, so let's vet this guy out for truthfulness. So I am so stupid. So as somebody who is authorized to do intelligence tests and evaluations, what would the criteria be for being stupid? So are you saying you have an IQ below 70? We're talking in the 60s here.
Right.
Did you not finish high school? Did you have to go to a lot of like remedial? What is your criteria to say you're stupid? Yeah. Like, do you have any criteria? You graduated high school on time. You never were held back. You've been working this job for the past 5 years, or whatever it is. I'm like, as somebody who does intelligence tests, I'm not hearing anything that would allow me to write off that you have some sort of intellectual disability. Yeah. So is this word stupid that you're calling yourself, is it to be accurate or is it just to be mean? Like, I'm sorry if I seem a little dense here, but I'm not understanding that word choice of, oh, I'm so stupid. So is there any truthfulness in that? Or are you just trying to be mean to yourself, which also isn't going to help you correct anything, by the way? Right. And so typically after that really annoying assessment that I would do with a patient, thorough, they typically don't like it because I'm basically pointing out the errors in their logic of choosing that word. Out of every word in their vocabulary, they chose an inaccurate word to describe themselves. And so throughout this kind of, logic game, we evaluated it for any truthfulness and they came wanting. And so eventually I can get my patient to say, okay, like, yes, I'm not stupid. I made a mistake. I wasn't being careful. Like, okay, being a human being that makes a mistake, that doesn't sound so wrong. I probably did that 3 times today. It's okay to be a human and to be imperfect and to make a mistake. Well, that sounds way nicer suddenly than I'm stupid. Yeah. And so, excellent. And that would be rationally executing accurate language. I am not, and it's just a simple statement. We're not talking, I don't need you to write me an essay about how you're not stupid, but just a sentence or two, basically counteracting the negative statement. So even if it's like, all right, I'm not stupid, I'm a human that made a mistake. I'm a human that made a mistake. I was trying to multitask too many things, whatever it is, to have a kinder and a more accurate statement, which I am all about.
Yes, me too. Kinder and more accurate. Wonderful. I love that. And I love your description of these language issues we're talking about, as you call them dramatic and inaccurate, to tailgate onto what you just said. And you have a chapter on the origins of this language. So what are the origins of this way of speaking, which is also, of course, a way of thinking, especially in that internal voice you're talking about?
Oh, yeah. So the origins of this bad habit. I blame television and social media are prime suspects in my origin here. Gosh, if anybody out there can remember shows like Jerry Springer, or what was another one? The Ricky Lake show.
Ricky Lake, yeah, there were a bunch of them.
A lot of daytime talk shows, very dramatic, people coming out screaming, making, huge accusations. And then I think that was kind of the birth. I think a lot of us just thought it was fun and funny. It was entertaining, of course, and it had good ratings. And so it was continued. But I mean, in the real world setting, that kind of behavior and language would have been, illegal most of the time.
Right.
And then that kind of started it off with things like reality TV shows, where it was, again, encouraged to use, oh my God, he's the worst boyfriend ever. This was the worst party ever. The party's ruined because of you. All of these like really grand statements that capture people's attention, get good ratings, get our emotions up. And it seems like it's all fun and games. And then I'm like really like consolidating this like one chapter, but in short, so that all happened. And then in around like 2000, early 2000s, basically, social media happened. And all of a sudden, we don't need to be on TV shows anymore to wait for our moment to be dramatic and catching and for people to give us that attention that we want. We can just sign up on Facebook and talk about, I had the best spring break ever, and get a bunch of likes. And this taught us to release ourselves of the value of accurate language for the gain of the attention and the grandiosity that comes with it. So we paid a huge price. We lost our accuracy and our truth for the price of fame, celebrity, attention,
entertainment.
Whatever it is. And with that price, not only came possible fame and attention, we also lost our sense of peace, because we can only tell our friends and our followers so many times that I have the worst husband ever. I have the worst husband ever. I have the most, all these horrible or great things every day happen to me. That's just a lot of energy going up and down.
Right.
And then before we believe it. And now we're anxious.
That's right. At best, useless energy. At worst, destructive energy.
I don't mean to throw too much blame towards social media and Ricky Lake shows and all those daytime talk shows, but as a people, I think we need to be aware of the price that we pay for things like entertainment, and the price was our peace. We paid for our peace to be involved with that type of communication.
That's beautifully put and accurate, I would say, too. Yeah. Thank you. All right, great. So now, what is the cognitive triangle, and how can I use it to get real?
Oh, yeah. So the cognitive triangle is this basic concept in psychology that within our mind, if you can kind of envision a triangle, there's 3 factors. There's going to be a factor for our thoughts, and a factor for our feelings and our behaviors. And so the general idea is that we're going along with our world and something happens. Something unexpected happens, good or bad. For this example, let's go with a negative one. Something bad happens. And I don't know, let's just say we got a parking ticket, you know?
Yeah.
We got a parking ticket. So we come back and we see we have a parking ticket on our car. So that's the event. Maybe the first thought is anger. You know, maybe the first thought is fear, my dad's gonna kill me. Maybe the thought is annoyance, you know, nothing good, typically, the thoughts. Now the thoughts are different than feelings. Now that thought is going to trigger, I'm scared, I'm angry, I'm upset, so all the bad feelings. And then maybe that makes us behave in some way. Maybe we go out with our friends drinking and talk about, you know, how unfair the ticket was. Maybe we go on social media and rant about how unfair the parking ticket was. And, you know, LA has horrible parking anyways, and I should just be able to park wherever I want to. Not wrong, but not wrong, but we're ranting, we're angry. And then maybe that thought comes again from all of this, you know, we're drinking with our buddies, we are ranting on social media, maybe we're even driving a little recklessly to show the man that, you know, I'm going to do what I want, which just kind of spiral. And so all of a sudden, from a simple parking ticket, we now are having mean, angry thoughts. We're experiencing fear, anger, sadness. Maybe we're fearing that we don't know how we're going to pay for the parking ticket. You know, it could be so many things that lead to unhealthy behaviors. Maybe nothing antisocial, but all of a sudden, for maybe that certain personality, we have that thought, we're angry, we're having thoughts like, oh, this is so unfair, we're feeling sad, and maybe now we go home and isolate. Maybe we're just go into a deep depression and we just cry. Maybe we don't eat that day because we're just all, we're anxious and we're upset or we're sad about it. And so, you know, depending on our personalities, different unhealthy behaviors will come out, but the unhealthy behaviors would come in our own unique way. And so we can do this for a positive one too. Let's say we come back and we get a flyer for a free ice cream, you know, that might make us think, yay, I'm really special and feel happy. And then the action would be, we go have ice cream with our friends. And so it goes both ways, you know, just depending on what the event is. And so with Get Real, I incorporate the cognitive triangle in every chapter to demonstrate its importance with words, because the cognitive triangle, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And so we have to be aware of it. And the words that we use are going to help it either slow down or possibly reverse. So let's take the parking ticket example again with Get Real. So we come back from lunch with our friends, you know, in a pre-COVID world, we come back from lunch with our friends and we see the parking ticket. And maybe our first thought is, oh my God, this is so annoying. I can't believe this happened to me. I'm so angry. And then we start feeling anger, frustration, unfairness, you know, all of the bad feelings. And then maybe we get in the car and say, all right, I really can't afford any more tickets this month. I'm going to drive home really safely today.
Yeah, right.
You know, this kind of like, let's pull it back together. Or maybe, all right, I really just want to go home and cry, but you know, I promised to go to my nephew's baseball game. And so I'm going to go to that baseball game and I'm going to cheer him on and I'm going to be the uncle that I want to be.
Nice.
And so whatever it is, having that moment to kind of think about our words and where we're going to go, and to kind of really take ownership for our minds. So mindfulness, take ownership for our minds and not let the cognitive triangle dictate what's going to happen next, but we are going to be the ones that are going to dictate what's going to happen next for us. And our words are going to be the thing that pulls us in that direction. I am going to still go to my nephew's baseball game. I'm still going to go to that, that event at UPR, even with the annoyance earlier today, because a lot of people who suffer from depression and anxiety, one thing like that happens, the day is ruined.
Yep.
I'm going home. I'm just
Yep.
going to have a bottle of wine by myself. Like,
Yep.
screw the world. I'm done.
Yep.
And so what Get Real is trying to do with the cognitive triangle is to try to kind of put a spoke in that wheel, that triangular wheel, and say, whoa, okay, you had that thought and you felt this, but what other word choices can we make right now? What other behavioral choices can we make right now? Let's not catastrophize. You made a promise to go to that game, that event, and what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Okay, I am going to drive carefully so I don't get another ticket. And I'm still upset, but it's not going to dictate the rest of my life.
Right. Brilliant. Brilliant. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for that. Yeah. And that's a good point. You do that in every chapter for the various subjects. And I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
And I have to say the chapters on personalization, catastrophizing, absolute language, that's what I called absoluting earlier. I don't think you say absoluting, but it's absolute language, judgmental language, cynicism, lying, all those things really hit home with me. And I suspect they will with many readers here in these plague years with civil and national unrest. Can I ask, were those difficult to write given how present and painful they are now?
Yeah, this year was certainly heavy hit for, I think, all of us providers out there. Anxiety and depression certainly are not new, but there's been such an increase in whether it's therapy or even medication providers for all of the anxiety and depression and fear that so many patients are, experiencing just in the general world right now. And so fortunately, I have been writing this book on and off for about 4 years. It's been a passion project. And so I've been able to kind of, I'm a mom and I have a full-time job. And so I'm pretty busy, but I've been writing this for about 4 years now, changing things, augmenting things, adding things. And so those chapters were already in place, but they certainly have had more of an impact in terms of everyday work and experiencing things like the catastrophizing. The catastrophizing has really probably been the biggest psychological weapon of mass destruction that I've seen personally. Shooting has also been big, but I would say the catastrophizing, what's this going to mean? This is going to mean X, Y, Z, and it's going to be horrible. And so just really talking to patients through Get Real and other tactics to really just kind of walk ourselves back before we have a panic attack. Let's gently evaluate for truthfulness and rationally execute accurate language. So with the accurate language, for example, one thing that I said often, not to be cheeky, but people keep saying, in practice and in just my real world stuff, oh my God, 2020 is the worst year ever. Around the new year, everyone was saying it a lot about oh yeah, bye-bye 2020, worst year ever. Right. And I actually did some research on this because it's me. And actually, most historians believe that the worst year ever was actually 536 AD. Yeah. Then if you want to look into it, 536 AD, they also had a plague. It was the first bubonic plague, actually. Yep. And they had volcanic eruptions. Yep. They multiple to the point where they blocked the sun. The ash was so bad, it blocked the sun. It was 18 months of grayness. They went into a mini ice age. All the crops died. There was no wine for that year. It was really bad. So like we have Netflix and we have wine this year, for example. And so I don't mean to be minimizing, like we've all suffered a lot, but to call this the worst year ever isn't accurate. And it also is going to make us feel like we were attacked by the year. You know, the universe, the year, this isn't a personal thing against you. This is everybody's going through it in their own way. I don't like the phrase, we're all in this together. I think that's a platitude that's overused to gain some sort of sense that, you know, we're a brotherhood. You know, it's not true. I don't like that platitude at all. But we are all living through a plague with the different types of demands. And historians would say that the worst year ever is going to be 536. It wasn't 2020, not by a long shot. We still have a lot to be grateful for this year. You know, you and I still get to talk. So that's great. And we still have an opportunity to look through this time of suffering for, was there any sense of meaning or gratitude that I can take away from this suffering? Something that I did on my Instagram account was I stated something along the lines of 2020 was a really challenging year for a variety of reasons for myself and everybody else. But you know what? Here are 3 things that 2020 gave to me this year. One was a cat. I've been wanting a cat for several years, and this was the year, for example. And it's really not an attempt to minimize, because I would never want to minimize anybody's suffering, but in terms of healing and trauma, trying to incorporate it into our life. One of my probably all-time favorite psychologists out there is Viktor Frankl, who Man's Search for Meaning, wonderful book. And he talks about the value of, if we're going to go through a horrible, struggling time, is there any possible way of finding meaning through our suffering? And if we can, that's going to be an opportunity for growth and recovery. And so let's not catastrophize. 2020 was not the word. It might have been, and for our own personal lives, but it was not the worst year ever historically, according to historians. The world suffered much more back in 536, and this is not a personal assault on you. The universe is not out to get you, and let's try to find some ways of incorporating some gratitude into our lives, and that kind of internal reflection with accurate language to help us.
Beautifully put. And what a breath of fresh air just to hear that language of rest and peace and not hyperbole. Thank you. Wonderful. Well, as we close up here, we're approaching an hour. It's been a full hour. Wonderful stuff. Just a couple of questions about you, if you don't mind. You seem to have found a new voice in your writing, one that's related to, but quite different from your therapeutic voice. What's that process like of having a voice, Jung might say a persona, in the therapeutic environment, and now here you are talking to me about a book? So that's a kind of translation at work, or maybe there's a better metaphor. What's that process been like for you?
I was actually saying it's really hard. I think when you're one-on-one with someone, you can feel the energy, you can feel the vibes. And a lot of my patients, I've known them for a long time, so I already know kind of the backgrounds or any possible triggers that could be said to avoid or to reflect on. Therapy is going to involve a lot of just compassion and patience and listening and dialogue. And in a book, it's just me. And so when I'm writing, I might write too much because I'm trying to not minimize anybody's suffering. Because if I know them, if they're in front of me, we can talk about it. We can have some discourse about it. But since it's just me, and I'm
Yep.
not getting feedback, I feel like I'm just kind of in this boat going about it. And so I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna say stuff. I'm gonna try not to hurt anybody's feelings. And
Yep.
so I'm gonna say a lot, probably over a lot, to not hurt anybody's feelings. Because as a therapist, I would never want to minimize anybody's experiences or feelings. And in therapy, I could, watch out for that, or, or I would know them enough to like be very kind about that. But since it's just me, it's kind of like, I feel like I'm in my own little boat, and I'm like, all right, well, these are my thoughts. I hope you find them helpful. I'm not getting any feedback that the room likes it, because I also do pre-COVID, I did some groups as well. And so I loved groups and I love speaking. But even then, to a group, we could gauge, we could take questions. And so finding the voice was difficult. And so after a certain point, I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to talk like I'm talking to my friends.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna throw it out there. It's my truth, and I'm gonna try to be as truthful with my truth as possible. And I'm gonna try to give lots of examples to to really explain what I'm trying to say. And hopefully people will like it as much as I do and understand. And I'm also would love it if anybody has any questions, to feel free to email me, contact me on my Instagram. And I would love to chat or to explain myself even further.
There are lots of writers out there nodding along with you right now about that experience, that kind of isolation and internal dialogue instead of external dialogue, which is why we have writing workshops, etc. Yeah, so yeah, understandable. So actually, this is your second book. So you're now a writer. What's next for you? Another book? What would that be about, if so?
I'm really open to that idea. Quite frankly, both of my books, I have them here, by the way, in case anybody wants to
Yes.
see. Here's my the Get Real. My first book was Thou Shall Be Happy, a more spiritual based book. But both books, to be quite honest, a muse came to visit me for both of these experiences. I was just blessed with this idea of this like pop, like this is an idea. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just have to do that. And so it was just it was a journey of just following along with the universe about something that I just felt like compelled to do and get that information and knowledge out. And so I don't want to force anything to come along. I would love to write another book, but I'm just going to have to wait and see what the universe offers me on that account. Other than that, I'm actually thinking about starting my own podcast for Get Real, to promote the book and the ideas in it. And so I'm just talking to a few people about how to get that up and running. I'm not a tech star myself, but I am truly interested to get the word out and to just talk more about my Get Real method. But yeah, we'll see what the world has to offer.
See, now all those writers are a little envious of you because you have a muse and they're still searching. They're still searching for them. That's wonderful, though. Good for you. Well, it's been a pleasure. Let me say that Catherine's grandfather was the president of PRS before me. And I hope I'm not sounding patronizing when I say he would be so proud of you. And I'm so happy you've continued to work with PRS. Your voice is really important for all seekers. And there are people you will reach with this that Manly Hall won't reach for various reasons, or I won't reach, or even your grandfather won't reach. We need these voices because people are primed to hear certain things at certain times. This book is going to do that for a lot of people, I know. So thank you, Catherine.
No, thank you. That just really, really gets me in my heart. My grandfather was an amazing man, amazing grandfather as well. just a wonderful, loving person. And I pray that one day I can be as wonderful as an orator and writer as he is. But for now, this is me. And I kind of do him proud. And, UPR, PRS has such a special place in my heart. And so just to be a part of it, and even in any capacity, keeps me connected. And so I just love it.
Well, your grandfather was, as you say, amazing, and he had a terrific singing voice. Do you have that?
Some would say. I actually do love to sing. So maybe the next time we can have a little session.
Next time. Perfect. All right. Catherine, you're a delight. Thank you for writing this book. The world needs it right now.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for reading it. And thank you for helping get the word out.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.